Steve. Hi. Thank you. Hi, Robbie. Hi.
Governor Romney, 3 minutes for your opening statement.
Well, you know, the older I get, the more I appreciate the extraordinary brilliance of the founders of this country. Because they not only changed the relationship between citizen and government, because the nations from which they had sprung, if you will, as the first individuals to come to this country, had the king as the sovereign and the citizens were the servants. And they said, no, we're going to make the citizens the sovereign, and the government's going to be the servant. And they went on to say, we're going to have not just political freedom, but also economic freedom and personal freedom. So we would be free not just to choose the people who would represent us, but also free to choose our course in life. And by virtue of those two freedoms and others, this became the place on the planet over the last couple hundred years where every pioneer, every innovator wanted to come. And come they did, by the millions. It's what made America the most powerful economic engine in the history of the world. And the principles that we had, this love of freedom, we shared with others. This nation has changed the world in part because of the brilliance of these founders, with political freedom and economic freedom. And they went on. They came up with the idea of federalism, which, contrary to the way it sounds, is the idea that states would have the rights to solve those problems that were closest to the people. And so education and caring for the poor and health care would be solved at the state level. States compete. As Justice Brandeis said, the states would be the laboratories of democracy. This is the heart of what makes America such an extraordinary engine of economic vitality and greatness. And what I see right now in Washington, and have over the last several decades, is the belief there that somehow Washington knows better than the people. That the sovereign ought to go back to being government, not the people. And the reason I see us struggling economically is because Washington has become too assertive, too big, too demanding on the lives of the American people. We simply have to rein back government to be what it was when it was considered by the founders, which is a source of encouraging the private sector, encouraging states, encouraging individuals to live with their freedoms and build a better tomorrow for themselves and for their kids. That's the job that has to be done. And I look at this administration, I don't think I've ever seen an administration who's gone further afield from the Constitution and from those principles I've described than the Obama administration. Not just with regulation, but with energy policy, with financial regulatory policy, and also with the worst example, Obamacare, which is a massive intrusion not only in the rights of states, but in the rights of citizens. And so what we got to do is repeal Obamacare and a lot of other regulation and legislation this administration has put through in order to go back to the principles that made this country what we are. Personal freedom, economic freedom, political freedom. This is the greatest nation in the history of the earth. I love America. I'm going to return America to those principles that made us that great nation. Thank you.
Representative King.
Thank you, Governor. I'm living proof that a king is not sovereign. And you're astute on the financial issues, and I would just ask point blank, would you repeal Dodd-Frank?
Yeah. Dodd-Frank, there are some provisions in it that needed to be updated, and it was appropriate for us to think about the regulation of the financial services sector. Look, the regulation of the mortgage industry was just not up to date. Derivatives, which few people can understand, we were way out of date with thinking about regulating those areas. We also had to ask ourselves, what's the right amount of capital that should go behind the assets that various institutions have? These are valid questions, and so it was appropriate for Congress to perhaps write a 10 or 20-page bill. But 2,300 pages with a complete rework of the financial services sector did the one thing which the banking sector couldn't live with. It created such uncertainty that the bankers, instead of making loans and encouraging the economy in a time of distress, pulled back. And I think, and part of that flows from the fact that the people who were putting that together, Dodd and Frank, the two people who, as much as anyone I know in this country, were responsible for the meltdown that we had.
I'm glad that's it, Mitt.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to imagine that we'd ask those two who were responsible for the committees overseeing banking, we'd say to them, okay, why didn't you write the legislation to change things? It's like, well, they should have started by saying, okay, we'll resign and let someone else do the job. And So I'd say, Representative, I say, do we need financial regulation? Of course. But we need streamlined, modernized, up-to-date, not overwhelming and burdensome in such a way that it frightens our financial services sector from being able to make the loans that small business in particular need.
Would you even incrementally privatize Fannie and Freddie?
The answer is yes. I mean, I look at Fannie and Freddie and just think that obviously they've grown massively beyond the scope that had been envisioned for them originally. Why the federal government is in the business of providing guarantees for over half the mortgages in the country, it's extraordinary. And how they could have done what they did. We all heard about these things called liar loans, where people didn't have to tell what their real income was, and they didn't have to show income statements. They didn't have to put any money down. Most people thought that was what, 1 or 2% of the mortgages that were being originated? It turned out in 2007 to be almost half of the mortgages originated. I mean, the failures of Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Barney Frank, Chris Dodd are just so legion that we really have to rethink about how we're going to support a growing housing industry.
Would you repeal the Community Reinvestment Act?
Absolutely. That was a disaster from the get-go. And look, I understand. And by the way, this is not just Democrats. There's people on both sides of the aisle who touted for a long time the idea that we want to put people in homes, and we're going to encourage people getting in homes and get banks to make loans to people who otherwise wouldn't qualify, and recognize when you make loans to individuals or businesses that don't qualify on their merits for a loan, you're adding risk. And maybe you can do that with 1% of the population. When you start doing it for half of all the loans going out, you're putting such risk in the system that when something happens, when one of the cards in this house of cards gets pulled out, the whole enterprise could fall, and we're still suffering from it.
You have a chance to run the table, Governor. Sarbanes-Oxley.
Well, Sarbanes-Oxley is one of the worst examples of what has happened to what's known as the middle market in America. The Wall Street Journal wrote an article the other day that's pretty interesting. They said if you look at where job growth really occurs in America, when it happens at small business, the very smallest enterprise with 1, 2, 5, 10 people, that's where a lot of jobs come in. But unfortunately, that's where a lot of jobs also go. Those businesses start and they fail. Big business tends not to grow terribly much. What really grows, they said, are the businesses in between. The small businesses that start doing so well, they keep growing and growing and send products around the world. And what Sarbanes-Oxley did was it made it more and more difficult for those businesses, those in the middle, to secure the capital they need to grow. And so those businesses are being starved. They used to go to the public market and get people to encourage their growth. Instead, they're now finding it harder and harder to do that because of Sarbanes-Oxley. So look, big companies, they're doing just fine. They can even live with Sarbanes-Oxley because they've learned how to, and they've got reams of lawyers. Small businesses, largely financed through individuals and their sweat equity. But the middle market, it really is burdened under Sarbanes-Oxley. So look, it's not that we don't want any regulation. We don't want to tell the world that Republicans are against all regulation. No, regulation is necessary to make a free market work. But it has to be updated and modern, and it has to have as its objective not just finding the few bad guys, but also encouraging all the good guys. And that's what we've lost in Washington. Too many people think that business is bad. You know what? Corporations are made up of people. Employees, shareholders, customers, they're people. We want people to succeed, and our private sector is where that's going to happen.
Thank you, Mitt. I also, in this heavy load that the presidency might well be, their time comes when the very difficult decisions are made, when they're life and death decisions, or decisions that direct the destiny of the United States, and you've taken all the information in from each side of the argument, and you have to finally say to all the advisors, now I'm alone with my decision. Can you tell us how you would do that?
30 seconds.
Well, I'm a highly analytical guy. So I look at all the data, all the analysis, and I write it all down and I summarize it. And I look at it with my eyes before me. I talk to my wife and get her feelings and her sense of confidence and comfort. I go on my knees. I'm a person of faith, and I look for inspiration. I remember seeing President George W. Bush, and he showed me a room in the White House where he said he looked at the paintings of other presidents who made tough decisions, and and then with all that God has endowed you with, your mind, with your values, you make that decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Governor Romney, it's good of you to be with us today. Thank you very much. I want to begin with a very fundamental question that is about both our obligations to human life and also the constitutional powers of the respected levels and branches of government. I want to begin by recalling Lincoln's situation. In his first inaugural address, he confronts the decision of the Supreme Court in the Dred Scott case about slavery, in which the court usurped the authority of the elected representatives of the people, the President and the Congress, and acted in a way that essentially removed an entire class of human beings, even free blacks, from the law's protection, from having any rights that others should have to recognize. And Lincoln said on that occasion that if the policy of the government on vital questions affecting the whole people is to be irrevocably fixed by decisions of the Supreme Court, the people will have ceased to be their own rulers, having to that extent practically resigned their government into the hands of that eminent tribunal. Of course, after Lincoln's death, we enacted a 14th Amendment to our Constitution, 13th, 14th, and 15th. And I want to ask you about the 14th. Many people today say that we need to wait for Roe versus Wade to be reversed before Congress can do anything about protecting life in the womb. However, Section 5 of the 14th Amendment expressly authorizes the Congress, by appropriate legislation, to enforce the guarantees of due process and equal protection contained in the amendment's first section. Now, as someone who believes in the inherent and equal dignity of all members of the human family, including the child in the womb, would you as President propose to Congress appropriate legislation pursuant to the 14th Amendment to protect human life in all stages and conditions?
Let me tell you, Robbie, what my orientation would be. Which is I would like to appoint to the Supreme Court justices who believe in following the Constitution as opposed to legislating from the bench. I would like to see that Supreme Court return to the states the responsibility for determining laws relating to abortion, as opposed to having the federal Supreme Court from the bench tell America and all the states how they have to do it. I think that's the appropriate course. Now, is there a constitutional path to have the Congress say, we're going to push aside the decision of the Supreme Court, and we instead are going to step forward and return to the states this power, or put in place our own views on abortion? That would create, obviously, a constitutional crisis. Could that happen in this country? Could there be circumstances where that might occur? I think it's reasonable that something of that nature might happen someday. That's not something I would precipitate. What I would look to do would be to appoint people to the Supreme Court that will follow strictly the Constitution as opposed to legislating from the bench. I believe that we must be a nation of laws, and I believe in supporting the Constitution as I understand it. But I'm not looking to create a constitutional crisis and have the Supreme Court say it's unconstitutional and then say, well, then you enforce it. Recognize that if we were to take that course, you could end up in a setting where, heaven forbid, the members of the opposition party had the House, the Senate, and the White House. And they might decide to do some things that violated their view of what they thought the Supreme Court had done. And so I would live within the law, within the Constitution as I understand it, without creating a constitutional crisis. But I do believe that Roe v. Wade should be reversed to allow states to make this decision.
Okay. Governor, will the person you choose as your vice presidential running mate be someone who shares your pro-life and pro-marriage convictions?
I certainly imagine so. I haven't made any selections in that regard, and as I look at the people around me that I've thought about as saying, boy, that's a terrific person, that's a terrific person, I would expect they'd all be pro-life and pro-traditional marriage. I don't have any names for you today. I think it's kind of presumptuous to choose to think about that at this stage, but this is an important enough issue that the person I would select in that position would share my views on those important issues.
So more than just expectation, would share your views?
That person would share my views, yeah.
Governor, in Illinois, after passing a civil unions bill, the state government decided to exclude certain religiously affiliated foster care and adoption agencies, including Catholic and Protestant agencies, because the agencies, in line with their faith, the teachings of their faith, cannot in conscience place children with same-sex partners. At least half of Illinois' foster and adoption funds come from from the federal government. So my question is, should the federal government be subsidizing states that discriminate against Catholic and other religious adoption agencies in this way? Now, I know in Massachusetts you have a very similar situation where Catholic Charities was driven out of adoption precisely because of their conscientious stand for placing children in homes with mothers and fathers. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I believe in religious tolerance and religious liberty. And that means to me that we're not going to force people of faith to violate their faith in order to carry out their profession. And so, for instance, if a practitioner, a nurse, or a doctor says, look, I don't, because of my faith, feel a willingness to participate in abortions under a conscience clause, which now exists, I'm not one of those that says, well, let's get rid of the conscience clause and force people to do something against their faith. That's simply not right. And so in this case, I again would say, look, in my state, for instance, about half of our adoptions were being placed by Catholic Charities. They had to get out of adoptions because they would not, under their faith, place children in the homes of same-sex couples. That's a mistake. We should allow people and institutions to practice their faith, and particularly if there are plenty of other institutions that are able to fulfill the responsibilities which government might apply to them.
In the hospital and healthcare area, as you know, Governor Mike Leavitt, is Health and Human Services Secretary under President Bush, put into place some very protective conscience protection regulations. They were then immediately abrogated by the Obama administration when they came in. Would you restore them and perhaps even strengthen them?
10 seconds, Governor.
Absolutely. We have to allow people to practice their faith, and when they have a matter of conscience that they can't participate in some form of activity which violates their faith, then they should be able to abide by their faith. And particularly when that's the case, when there are plenty of other opportunities for people to have a service provided.
Thank you. Senator Mitt.
Mitt, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Jim.
Let's start by talking about unions. For me, it's becoming one of the biggest issues that we're dealing with at the federal level because there's such an insidious relationship between unions and the Democrat Party. The president and the Democrats are trying to expand government unions at the state and the federal level because of the political support that comes back. And we're seeing the difficulty at the state level to make the reforms and cut back because of the resistance of government unions. Where are you on unions? And I'll put it in this context. There's a federal law right now that requires an American to join a union if their workplace is unionized. It's only if your state opts out of that law that your people are free not to join a union. And there are 22 states that have opted out, but there's still a federal law that requires Americans to join unions. And we have legislation at the federal level to repeal that with a federal right to work law. I understand that you've said that's a state issue and the federal government shouldn't be involved, but the federal government is involved because they have the law that requires that. Where are you on the federal right to work, and what is your opinion about government unions at the federal and state level?
Yeah, first of all, what I said was if a right to work piece of legislation reached my desk at the federal level, I'd sign it.
Okay.
And the right course, I believe, politically at this stage is to have states carry out their own right to work legislation. And as you know, right to work states, those 22, have created 3 million jobs over the last 10 years. The union states have lost about 500,000 jobs. So right to work is the way to go if you want good jobs. That's number one. Government unions, and unions play an important role in our country, and can be, the carpenters union, for instance, trains their people in ways to provide good services. When people want to compete on a fair basis, that's great. When the government has people in unions, it presents a particular problem. And there are a couple of ways it presents a problem in my view. When unions are allowed to collect money from their members, and then one person, the chief executive of that union, can give that to whichever candidate they want, that's simply a violation of the personal rights of that individual. And that shouldn't be allowed. And number two, I really have a problem with the idea that one person is able to collect money from all of their members and then give it to a party or an individual who that person may then be the one that decides on matters of legislation directing that union. It's almost like a form of corruption. I mean, it's like, okay, I got all this money, I'm going to elect the person who's going to give me what I want. And so the power of unions in influencing elections is a real problem. And the place I would address it, and how I'd address it, is with legislation saying that individual union members may not have money taken out of their paycheck to go into funds which can then be directed by an individual in a way that might be different than what they would have preferred themselves. That should not be allowed.
Thank you. Let me switch subjects on you real quickly. What would you change about our foreign policy?
A lot. First, I'd have one.
Okay.
I mean, the president has been reactive. And anytime there's a reactive approach to foreign policy, sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong. I'm glad he got Osama bin Laden. He was opposed to the surge in Iraq, but fortunately he pursued a surge in Afghanistan. But the president has, with regards to the Arab Spring, not had a policy. And we have right now, we have a president and an administration that called Mr. Assad of Syria a reformer. This is a person who Hamas is headquartered in Damascus, has been arming Hezbollah through Syria, has allowed terrorists to go through Syria to go and kill our troops in Iraq. And then he turns on his own people, Assad does, and we call him a reformer? This president should have called him from day one what he was, a killer. So we need to have a very clear foreign policy. And let me just describe very briefly what the principles ought to be. Number one, everything we do in foreign policy ought to be looked through with the following lens. Does it make America stronger? Our interest is to make sure America is strong, because a strong America is the best ally peace has ever known. So we need to make sure it keeps America strong. Number two, does it promote our values? Human rights, free enterprise, freedom, democracy, because we've learned that those values tend to be associated with more peaceful people. And number three, can we link arms with our allies? When the president threw Israel under the bus, a nation which shares our values and is our best friend in the Middle East, he violates the principle of staying with your allies and showing strength by virtue of doing so. So those are three principles of my foreign policy, and I'm happy to take you nation by nation.
But I want to cut you short.
All right.
We've got about a minute and 15 seconds. I want to give you a chance to talk about health care. As you know, if you're our nominee, the president's going to say that you implemented Obamacare in Massachusetts. How would you describe what Massachusetts did, the mandate to buy insurance at the state or the federal level? And you've got about a minute, and I'll let you finish up in any way you like.
Actually, about 20 seconds.
Well,
I'll take a minute.
My timer has 55 seconds, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
that'll be one of my best assets,
okay,
if I'm able to debate President Obama, as I'd hope to be able to do, by saying, Mr. President, you give me credit for what you tried to copy in some ways. Our bill dealt with 8% of our population, the people who were uninsured, and said to them, hey, if you can pay, don't count on the government. Take personal responsibility. We didn't raise taxes, Mr. President. You raised taxes $500 billion. We didn't cut Medicare. One president in modern history cut Medicare, this president. And I'll say to him, why didn't you give me a call? And I'd have told you what to do right and what not to do. And the critical thing is this. We dealt with 8%. He dealt with 100% of American people. He said, I'm going to change health care for all of you. It's simply unconstitutional. It's bad law. It's bad medicine. And on day one of my administration, I will direct the Secretary of Health and Human Services to grant a waiver from Obamacare to all 50 states. It has got to be stopped, and I know it better than most. Thank you.
Sir.
Thank you, man.
Thanks. Good to be with you. Thank you. Thanks so
On
much.
behalf of the American Principles Project and Senator Jim DeMint, I'd like to thank you for joining us this afternoon for this important event. We hope this forum has equipped you with a better understanding of each candidate that you saw today. This event will be rebroadcast tonight at 8 p.m. on ETV's South Carolina channel. Additionally, you can join us